When the hourglass runs out. 10 Stoic lessons for people who feel like they're already late. There is a moment, believe it or not, that every single human being shares with every other human being who has ever drawn breath. Nobody has avoided it. Nobody will. It arrives without warning sometimes, and sometimes after a long conversation the body has been having with itself that the mind tried very hard not to overhear. Inside that moment, two things become suddenly, brutally clear. The time you had was always shorter than you let yourself believe. And the choices you made inside that time were the only thing about you that ever actually mattered in the end. The people who have stood closest to that threshold, soldiers dragged from rivers by their own belts, doctors pulled back from the edge of their own grief, prisoners walking out of solitary after years underground. Parents who buried a child and somehow still got up the next morning, they described the same thing afterward, almost in the same words. They say the world did not change. They say their eyes did. They say they stopped postponing things. They say they finally understood what the rest of us keep forgetting every single ordinary morning we are allowed to wake up. Roughly 2,000 years ago, a small circle of thinkers sitting in the Mediterranean basin built a way of looking at the world so unsentimental, so stripped of polite fiction, that emperors reached for it in their darkest hour. And so did the slaves who served those emperors, and so did the generals who had just lost their armies. And so did the prisoners who had nothing left except the sentence they were about to serve. They called their system Stoicism, and they did not build it for comfortable afternoons or for people whose worst problem was a slow internet connection. They built it in plagues, on battlefields, in forced exile, in slavery, in the long and brutal aftermath of losing children who did not survive childhood, which was, heartbreakingly, the ordinary experience of the ancient world. It survives 2 millennia later because it was never about ideas for their own sake. It was a manual for survival, forged by people who had nothing left to lose and everything left to do with the days that remained. If you are listening to this because something in your life right now feels unbearable, a loss you cannot stop reaching for, a failure you keep replaying, a version of yourself you no longer recognize when you look in the mirror, you need to hear this clearly before anything else. You are exactly who the next 10 lessons were written for. They are not soft. Some of them will feel like a hand closing around your throat before it lets you breathe again. But if you let them in, if you actually let them reshape the way you walk through the next ordinary day of your one and only life, you will be a different person on the other side of this than you were when you pressed play. Lesson 1, the compass that does not need the storm to stop. Imagine a navigator lost at sea in the worst weather his crew has survived in 20 years. The wind is wrong. The stars are hidden. The swells are taller than the mast. The crew is praying to gods the navigator privately suspects are not listening. And somewhere in his coat, against his chest, he carries a small brass instrument. It does not stop the storm. It does not part the waves. It does not lift the ship out of the black water and set it down on dry land. All it does is give him a fixed direction, a true north that exists whether he can see it or not. The crew wants him to grip the wheel harder. The crew wants him to fight the waves with his bare hands. The crew wants him to scream at the weather until the weather apologizes. He does none of that. He trims the sail to the smallest workable size, he tells one trusted sailor the heading they are holding, and he keeps his eyes on the compass while everyone else loses theirs to panic. Most people spend their entire lives gripping the wheel of a ship they were never actually steering. They scream at traffic that does not know their name. They reread old text messages from people who have already forgotten the conversation entirely. They lie awake at 3 in the morning rewriting a past the universe has flatly refused to let them revise. Epictetus, a man who spent years in actual chains before he ever spent a single day inside his own mind that was free, built his entire teaching around one brutal clarifying distinction: some things are within your power, and everything else is not. Confusing the two is the root of nearly every unnecessary suffering you have ever felt in your short life. Your reputation is not yours. Other people's opinions of you are not yours. The outcome of your effort is not yours. What is yours is smaller than you think, and infinitely more powerful than you realize. Your judgments, your choices, your effort in this exact moment, right now, as you are listening to this sentence. That is the whole territory you actually govern, and it is enough, because it was always the only thing that was ever going to determine whether you suffered or whether you rose. Think about how much of yesterday got swallowed by things you cannot touch. The comment section under a post you should have never opened. The promotion someone else got for reasons that had nothing to do with your actual worth. The weather on the one afternoon you needed sun. None of it moves an inch no matter how hard you grip it. And every second spent gripping it is a second stolen from the compass you were actually put here to keep consulting for the people who need you to keep heading somewhere true. This is not resignation. It is not surrender. It is the opposite of both. It is the realization that your energy is finite and that you will never get today back once it has passed. Every ounce spent on the uncontrollable is an ounce stolen from the one thing that was always within your reach: yourself, your character, your response to whatever the world decides to throw at you next without consulting you first. There is a small exercise worth trying the next time you feel your grip tightening around something outside your control. Ask yourself, out loud if you have to, is this thing in front of me something I can act on directly right now with my own two hands? Or is it something I can only watch and hope about? If it is the second kind, the grip you are holding is not protecting you from anything. It is only exhausting you for absolutely no return, hour after hour, day after day, while the actual work of your life sits untouched, waiting for the attention you keep spending elsewhere. There is a quieter second part of this lesson that most people miss entirely. Once you stop fighting the storm, you are left with an uncomfortable amount of silence. Because you no longer have the weather to blame for your unhappiness. That silence is not empty. It is the room where responsibility finally lives, uncontested, waiting for you to pick it up. Most people avoid that room for years because blaming the storm is easier than admitting they were supposed to be trimming the sail all along. But the navigator who finally stops blaming the wind is the only navigator whose ship ever actually reaches the harbor. Lesson 2: the injury that happened in your own courtroom. Imagine two soldiers hit by the same arrow in the same battle, struck within seconds of each other in nearly the same place. One bleeds out within the hour. The other survives 3 decades longer and dies peacefully in his own bed at 90. The arrow was the same. The wound was nearly the same. What was not the same, what was never the same, was the verdict each soldier passed on what had just happened to him. The first soldier, on impact, told himself a story. This is the end. I am finished. I was always going to die in this stupid war. None of it ever mattered. The second soldier, on impact, told himself a different story with the same raw facts. This is bad. This hurts. This changes the next 6 months of my life entirely. But I am still here, and the things I have not yet done are still waiting for me on the other side. The arrow was not the wound. The story the wound triggered inside his own head was the wound. This is the second brutal insight the Stoics handed down across 2,000 years. It is never the event itself that destroys you. It is the verdict you pass on the event, usually within a fraction of a second, usually without a trial, usually without evidence, usually without any chance of appeal from a judge who slept through law school. Someone cancels plans, and you rule silently and instantly that you are unwanted. You lose a job and you rule just as fast that you are worthless at some fundamental level. You receive a single cold look from a stranger on the sidewalk, and you write it into your permanent file as evidence you do not belong in the world you are standing in. The event happened out there in the world. The wound happened in here, in your own private chambers, and you were the one holding the gavel the entire time. This single realization that our reactions are opinions, not facts, would later become the seed of an entire branch of modern psychology built on retraining exactly this kind of automatic punishing self-verdict. But long before any laboratory confirmed it, Stoic teachers were telling their students the same thing in the middle of a plague-ridden, war-torn world, with none of our modern comforts. Strip away your opinion about what happened to you, they said, and look at what is actually left underneath it. Usually what is left is far smaller and far more survivable than the story you wrapped around it in the space of a single panicked heartbeat. You are not required to believe every verdict your mind hands down the instant something goes wrong. You are allowed to appeal. You are allowed to ask, is this actually true, or is this just the fastest, most familiar way my mind knows how to suffer because it has practiced suffering this exact way 1,000 times before? The people who master this question stop being victims of their own thoughts and start becoming judges of them instead, which is a fundamentally different way to move through a single day on this earth, and it changes everything downstream of it. Consider how differently those two soldiers might have lived the rest of their lives, depending only on which verdict they happened to hand themselves in the first 5 seconds after impact. One of them ruled himself dead, the other ruled himself still alive. The arrow did not know the difference. Only the verdict knew. Try this the next time something wounds you today, this week, the next time life catches you off guard. Separate the raw event from the story you immediately wrapped around it in the first few seconds. The event is neutral. It happened. It is finished. It cannot be changed no matter how much energy you spend wishing it otherwise. The story is yours, freshly written in real time, and stories, unlike events, can always be rewritten with a steadier hand once you notice who is holding the pen. Consider how much of your own personal history has been shaped not by what actually happened to you, but by the earliest verdict you happened to pass on it, sometimes as a child too young to appeal any ruling at all. A single offhand comment from a parent, absorbed once, repeated for decades as a permanent fact. A single failure in front of classmates in 3rd grade, filed away as a life sentence about your own ability. The event lasted seconds. The verdict has been serving its sentence for years, sometimes decades, entirely unexamined, because no one ever told you the courtroom was still open for a retrial. Lesson 3: the canyon the river was not supposed to make there is a place on the American continent where, over the course of several million ordinary years, a small river carved a canyon deeper than most skyscrapers are tall. The river did not ask permission. It did not negotiate. It did not wait for the rock to apologize for being in the way. It simply kept moving forward, day after day, with no more drama than water ever has, and the rock that refused to move was the rock that got shaped instead, slowly, then faster, then deep enough to see from space. The rock did not lose. It became something the rock on flat ground, untouched by any river, can never become. The obstacle in the path became the path itself, not in spite of the obstacle, but because of it. Without that unmovable rock, that river would still be a quiet creek running through a pasture somewhere, unmemorable, unvisited, unknown. A prisoner named Marcus Aurelius, who happened to also be running an empire at the time, wrote to himself in the dead of night, in a journal he never intended for a single other human being to read, that what blocks the action can be turned into the action, that what looks from the outside like the thing stopping you is, very often, the exact material the thing itself has to be made out of. There is no version of himself writing that journal without the obstacles he was writing it inside of. Plague, war, betrayal from people he personally trusted with his life. The journal is what was made out of those obstacles. Without them, the journal does not exist. Without them, Marcus Aurelius is a forgotten emperor of middling rank. This was not a slogan he repeated for comfort on his worst nights. It was a working method he used to survive years that would have broken almost anyone else who ever wore a crown as heavy as his. Every difficulty placed in front of him was reframed deliberately, forcibly, as material to be worked with, not punishment sent to destroy him, but material sent to shape him into the only kind of ruler who could still be trusted to lead after everything had already gone wrong. Most people treat hardship as personal proof that life has turned against them specifically, as though the universe has singled them out for cruelty unavailable to anyone else on earth. A marriage ends and they read it as evidence they are unlovable at some fundamental level they cannot fix. A business fails and they read it as evidence they were never capable in the first place, and never will be. But the river did not read the rock as evidence it was never meant to reach the sea. The rock was simply the mechanism by which a quiet creek became a canyon worth seeing from orbit. Your setbacks are not verdicts on your worth. No matter how convincingly they disguise themselves as one in the moment, they are more often than not the exact resistance required to forge whatever you are supposed to be becoming, whether you asked for that resistance or not. This does not mean you pretend the pain does not exist, because that would be its own kind of lie the canyon did not tell itself. Cutting stone genuinely hurts stone. The river knows it. But there is a difference between denying the obstacle and deciding what the obstacle is for. One path leaves you a creek forever, terrorized by every rock you encounter, flinching at the memory of being deflected. The other path leaves you a canyon, deep enough to stand inside, deep enough to change the climate of the entire region around you. The next time life places a rock directly across the only river you were trying to run, ask the river's question instead of the victim's question. Not why is this happening to me, as though the universe owes me an explanation it will never provide, but what shape is this obstacle trying to carve out of me, and what canyon is hiding inside it that I cannot see yet? Because something is always being carved in that moment, whether you cooperate with it or fight it every step of the way. There is a version of you on the other side of every river that was supposed to break you, and that version did not exist before the rock. You cannot meet them by avoiding the rock. You can only meet them by staying in the current long enough to let it cut you into the shape the current was always after. Lesson 4. The air you are breathing without noticing there is a particular kind of illness that passes silently between people who share a room for long enough, even when nobody touches anyone and no one coughs. The ancient Romans had a name for it. And so did every culture that ever watched a whole household mysteriously fall sick within a week of each other with no obvious cause. We now understand the mechanism, but the Romans understood the pattern long before the mechanism. You breathe in whatever is in the room with you, whether you chose to or not, whether you noticed it happening or not, whether you wanted it or not. Seneca warned his students about exactly this invisible contagion nearly 2,000 years before modern research confirmed it under a microscope. He said that we never return home from certain company with the same character we carried into it, that something rubs off on us whether we notice it happening or not, the way a sick man's illness can pass to someone who never touched him, only stood in the same room and breathed the same air for long enough. Character, in this sense, is not built alone in a room with your own good intentions and a motivational poster. It is built in rooms, among people, and most of us never once audit the rooms we spend our entire lives standing in. There is a reason certain rooms feel exhausting to leave and other rooms feel energizing to leave, even when nothing dramatic happened in either one. The exhausting room was quietly asking you to shrink to fit it. The energizing room was quietly asking you to grow to meet it. Most people never name this difference out loud, and so they keep choosing the exhausting room simply because it is familiar, mistaking familiarity for belonging. Lesson 1. Master the space between stimulus and response. There is a moment so small, so invisible, that most people never notice it. It is the moment between what happens and how you react. Someone insults you, there is a moment. Something goes wrong, there is a moment. You feel anger, fear, or frustration, there is a moment. And inside that moment, your entire life is being shaped. But here's the problem. Most people never use that moment. They skip right over it. They react instantly. Someone disrespects them and they fire back. Something doesn't go their way and they panic. They feel anger and they explode. And just like that, they lose control. Epictetus once said, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." Most people think that just means stay calm. But it means something deeper than that. It means your power lives in the pause. That tiny gap between stimulus and response is where your freedom exists. Imagine a mountain. Storms hit it. Winds crash against it. Rain tries to erode it. But the mountain does not react. It does not panic. It does not fight back. It remains grounded. Now compare that to a dry leaf. The wind blows and the leaf flies away. No control, no direction, no stability. Most people live like that leaf. Strong people become the mountain. Look at your own life. How many times have you said something you regret, overreacted to something small, let someone else control your mood? That is not just weakness, it is a lack of awareness. Because if you were aware of that moment, you would choose differently. The next time something triggers you, don't respond immediately. Pause for 3 to 5 seconds. Feel the emotion, but don't act on it. Observe it like an outsider and ask yourself. Epictetus said, "Men are disturbed not by things, but by the views they take of them." This is where most people lose control. They do not separate reality from ego. They take everything personally, and suddenly everything becomes about them. And when your ego is attached to everything, everything can hurt you. Imagine a mirror in a forest. A lion passes by, and it reflects the lion. A storm moves through, and it reflects the storm. A broken tree falls, and it reflects that too. But the mirror is never affected. It does not become the storm. It does not become the destruction. It simply reflects reality as it is. That is how your mind should work. But most people are like muddy water. The moment something touches them, they become disturbed. Their clarity disappears. Let's say someone doesn't reply to your message. Reality says, they didn't reply. That's all. But your mind says, they're ignoring me. They don't value me. I must have done something wrong. Now your mood changes. Your energy drops. You start overthinking. All because of a story you created, not because of reality. From now on, separate two things: what actually happened and what you are telling yourself about it. Train your mind to say, this is what happened, and this is my interpretation. That single habit breaks emotional illusion. Marcus Aurelius practiced this daily. He stripped events down to their raw form. Instead of saying, this is terrible or this is unfair, he would say, this is simply an event. Because when you remove emotional labeling, you remove unnecessary suffering. Think about the sky. Clouds come and go. Storms appear and disappear. Lightning strikes. Rain falls. But the sky remains unchanged. Your thoughts, your emotions, your situations, they are clouds.